Hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Richard Clarkin, an actor you may have seen in George A. Romero's Land of the Dead, in Daniel Coburn's You Are Here, in Michael Dowse's Goon, or in a recurring role as Chief Constable Davis on Murdoch Mysteries. Most recently, he's had key roles opposite Sarah Kolaski and Adam Garnett-Jones's Great, 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 opposite Tori Higginson in Ordinary Days, and opposite Stuart Hughes in the feature film adaptation of The Drawer Boy, which opens in Toronto this Friday, November 23rd at the Carlton Cinemas. Richard picked The Pledge, Sean Penn's 2001 drama starring Jack Nicholson as a retired police detective obsessed with finding a murderer of young girls. An adaptation of Friedrich Dürrenmatt's novella, which was itself based on the author's screenplay for the 1958 feature It Happened in Broad Daylight, this is actually the fourth version of the story. It was remade by Alberto Negrin in 1979 as La Promesa and in 1996 by Rudolf Vandenberg as The Cold Light of Day, starring Richard E. Grant. But none of the previous versions has what Penn and Nicholson bring to The Pledge, an almost merciless focus on the weight of the mission and the toll it takes on the man who accepts it. What does it really mean when someone vows never to rest until justice is done? This is Someone Else's Movie.
You know, you go through a number of options in your mind, and there's movies that sort of hit you like a ton of bricks when you were very young, and then I just thought, you know, of movies that are sort of under the radar that resonated, and the reason I circled back to The Pledge is Sean Penn. It's his third movie that he directed. Mm-hmm. And he is so committed to the movie he wants to make and insistent on its tone. The movie is deceptive in that it has this sort of trappings and tropes of police procedural, but it's got a very kind of European tone to it in that he uses music, he uses imagery, he uses slow motion, and he's committed to a character study really in this movie, so that you not only have the pleasure of following a thriller, and he succeeds in that, in my opinion. You also have a terrific performance by Jack Nicholson, who, you know, there's no kind of showboating and tricks involved. He's just unadorned and pretty straight up, and I think Sean Penn just drew an amazing performance from him in it, and the movie does have a vibe. It's got a real vibe to it that is from the music he uses, the pacing. He slows it down, and it's not in a hurry to go anywhere. But for me, I found it compelling, and he also has a supporting cast that is killer.
Yeah, it's a deep bench.
Yeah, Mickey Rourke, Sam Shepard, Aaron Eckhart, Patricia Clarkson, Vanessa Redgrave, Helen Mirren.
Yeah, Tom Noonan's in there somewhere.
Tom Noonan.
Robin Wright Penn, of course. Or Robin
Wright is fantastic in it.
Yeah.
And so it's actually a beautiful film to watch visually. It's quite masterful. Yeah. I find. I don't know. You've seen everything. What do you recall of it, and did you like it when it came out?
I did. Yeah. I think. Well, I saw it in. I think I saw it in. I know I saw it at the Warner Brothers screening room, which was at the time was all the way up at the Young Street in the 401 in the middle of the old Warner offices, which you had to take the subway and then walk a good 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. And this was a December awards consideration screening, so it was miserably cold. Mm-hmm. And to get to that theater, which was a little tiny room with 30 people, and see all the other critics sitting there.
Yeah.
And we got there, and to sit and watch this sun-blasted neo-noir, basically, was incredibly jarring. And I remember, I liked it a lot, and I remember thinking at the very end that I wish I'd seen it on a bigger screen. Because it was slightly larger than that one, but not by much, so maybe 160, 180 inches. It was not a big theater. Yeah. And it's... The imagery, I remember it being like profoundly yellowy orange, like it's going to swallow you up. The desert image just becomes this dominating aesthetic where after a while Nicholson's skin starts to look the same color. Yeah. And you're washed in this bleached, blasted land.
And it takes place in Nevada, in basically rural Nevada largely. I think they might have shot some of it in BC.
Oh, yeah?
I thought I read that somewhere at some time. But the movie goes through the seasons, so you get snow, heavy snow, you get early winter, you get 4th of July, you get Nicholson, he's a big fisherman in this movie, and you get him out on the lake. So just visually, it is quite stunning, and the cinematographer is Chris Menges, who...
he shot The Killing Fields.
The Mission.
He's a director in his own right these days.
He's a director in his own right. And another movie that he shot, another actor-directed movie that is, I think, very accomplished is 3 Burials of
Melquiades Estrada. He shot that as well?
He shot that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he shot that. And that's another beautifully shot movie that is very much actor-driven and story-driven. And, I'm a sucker for character-driven movies. And I really, I like to see the whole caboodle in a movie like anyone else. But I'll see a flawed movie with great performances any day of the week. Yeah. Because there's great artistry in the different aspects of any movie, and it's very rare to get them all to add up.
Yeah.
So if you can get some flashes in movies and good actors, great actors in the right part can, as you know, salvage a movie. And this is not a movie that needs to be salvaged. It's a very good movie. But again, Jack Nicholson, in some ways it's a retirement crisis movie.
Yeah.
And he it kind of moves towards, there's a lucidity. Just the basic nuts and bolts of the story are...
Sure.
He's retiring, and literally at his retirement party, there's an abduction, rape, and murder of a 10-year-old girl in his district, and his superiors want him to enjoy the retirement party, but he is compelled to go to the scene of the crime. He becomes obsessed with this case, and he promises the dead girl's mother, played by Patricia Clarkson, that he swears to God, because she insists on that he will solve and find the killer of her daughter. And so that seed is planted in him, and he's retiring, and he's he loves fishing, and he's trying to find some balance in his life. He ends up buying a sort of broken down gas station, fishing supply shop.
Well, because it's at the nexus of the three
exactly
three abductions.
Exactly.
He's as you say, he's consumed by this case.
Yeah.
To the point where it consumes him right back.
Yeah.
His plan is to, although it's never articulated, because this isn't a guy who talks about his plans. His inner monologue is just a stare, as far as we can tell, just this blank stare of the thing that Nicholson does so well, which is just turn himself off.
Yeah.
And brood.
Yes.
Which became caricatured in the 90s, and then he got back to this. This one was sort of the reminder that Nicholson can be a serious actor if you let him.
Absolutely.
Like, I think about The Passenger a lot in comparison. The two hollowed out people who are just searching for purpose. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he buys the gas station and fishing bait store to wait.
Buys it from Harry Dean Stanton.
Yeah, another tiny little cameo of perfect choice.
And what's beautiful about it is, in buying the gas station, he also meets Robin Wright, and they end up having quite a lovely relationship. And he becomes a great father figure to. She's a single mom.
So she's a single mom with a 10-year-old daughter.
With a 10-year-old, yeah. And
exactly
so
like
that's
the other victims.
Yeah, but he's making great attempts to normalize his life and to find some kind of satisfaction in owning this gas station and having a loving relationship. Unless, but the obsession is still within him, and without giving away what transpires,
we can talk about it.
Well, yeah.
I mean, we sort of have to.
But where he goes psychologically is sort of a derangement of the soul.
Yeah, I mean, the film makes a pretty solid case that consciously or unconsciously, and I think consciously, he's using the situation as bait. He's hoping that this girl lures the killer. I don't think he's hoping that she gets abducted.
Yeah.
But he's trying to be there so he can stop the next one. And that, the waiting game that ensues, where some part of him has to be a family man, like this person he has never been, but clearly always wanted to be. I don't think he's faking any of it.
No,
but I do think he puts himself in a position where doing this thing, it gives him an opportunity to have a life.
Yeah,
but it's all like it's fruit of the poison tree. It's all rooted in this obsession.
And he gets so psychically undressed by Robin Wright when she finds out that he's used his daughter as bait to catch the killer.
Yeah, she sees him.
You see him unable to respond to any of her questions, and the look in his eyes, and I was reminded of The Shining.
Okay.
Some of those bar scenes where he's just elsewhere. But no one really gets into that detached nether space in the way that he can. There's I don't know how he sources that, but it doesn't take much, and it's just a very no punches pulled performance.
Yeah.
And there's still some of the old charm at times, from him. But it's such a beautifully calibrated movie and performance.
Yeah. Ebert at the time wrote about it and liked it a lot and focused a lot on what the film says about Nicholson refusing to be put out to pasture, how he's literally being shoved out the door when this murder happens, and Ebert's theory is that he holds on to it as a way to remain valid, to still be a man, because there's that whole masculinity thing. And then when he revisited it a few years later in a Great Movies essay, he was fixating on how Sean Penn's film all of his films interrogate masculinity on some level. Yeah. That The Indian Runner is about brothers and one who's responsible for the other. The Crossing Guard is about a man, Nicholson again, trying to avenge his daughter's death, but not really for that reason. He just wants to do violence to the man who did violence to him. And then this comes along, and then the next one was Into the Wild. It's a true story of a young man who went off into the wilderness to live and died instead. And how all of these films are sort of at odds with the idea of what it is to be a man in the modern age, because Penn, in the 80s, he made his whole reputation on being a brawler and being, punching photographers and, like quasi macho things that were perceived as heavily masculine, and how his movies all seem to be interrogating those and trying to figure out what's right and what's wrong, what works and what doesn't. Yeah. And The Pledge is the only one that centers on age. right? That centers on being an older type of masculinity, and how that works in the present, and everybody else is very cynical, and Nicholson's character constantly insists on nobility, on doing the right thing, and how no one else will, and even if it comes down to following procedure, and the interrogation with Benicio del Toro, another great cameo.
There you go. Yeah, I forgot.
Yeah. No, I just remembered that now. This second, it's like, oh yeah, he's in that too. But the whole point of that scene is that his replacement, Nicholson's replacement, is played by Aaron Eckhart, is badgering and luring Del Toro, who doesn't have the capacity to understand what's going on, let alone to confess to murder. But Nicholson gets to sort of watch in horror as this new generation that's only interested in closing the case comes forward, and his dissatisfaction with
He's
the way...
He's appalled by the interrogation.
The way things
go. He says
go.
He practically blew him because he actually physically caresses the suspect and is almost on top of him in this kind of weird...
Well, it's a seduction, right? He's
it's
seducing
a seduction.
him into confessing.
Yeah, it's a seduction.
And I'm kind of... if you want to talk about tiny little perfect performances, what Eckhart's doing is amazing, because he was in that little tiny pocket where he was playing snakes and heels.
Yeah.
And he shows us how this guy can appear reasonable, even as he's completely just blaspheming the concept of justice.
Yeah, yeah.
He sells himself really well.
He sells himself really well, and he's... at times he's just such a doofus in his job, but he inhabits that and embraces the doofusness of it really well. It's a really, really good performance by him too.
Yeah, I don't think there's a bad performance.
I don't know. There isn't
really. Everybody gives exactly what's necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting what you said about Sean Penn's sort of interrogation of masculinity, and in The Pledge, Nicholson, as you say, he's always noble, and there's an observation of his vulnerabilities, and you can see him checking at times baser impulses to sort of rise above any provocations. And when he becomes a father-like figure to the 10-year-old girl, Robin Wright's daughter, and with Robin Wright, he is exquisitely sensitive to their situation and her situation, and does not push or initiate. It's kind of all up to Robin Wright to give him the signals, and it's really lovely, lovely. And I'm a big fan of Sean Penn as an actor. I've seen Indian Runner, Crossing Guard, and Into the Wild. When people think of Sean Penn, they don't think of his directing chops.
No, hardly ever.
And like he's hugely capable as a director. And I'm just curious why we haven't seen him behind the camera more.
I think I'm going to stop and actually check, because I'm pretty sure he made something, took it to Cannes a couple of years ago with Charlize Theron and Javier Bardem, and it got laughed off the screen. And it's never been released in North America. Yeah, The Last Face, 2016. Charlize Theron plays the director of an international aid agency in Africa who meets a relief aid doctor, played by Javier Bardem. Amidst a political social revolution, together they face tough choices surrounding humanitarianism and life through civil unrest. Played at Cannes, has never been seen since. Although it might have opened in the States, it's never surfaced in Canada, and as far as I know, it's not on Disco.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's his first directorial effort in 10 years.
Wow.
Since
Into the Wild?
Since Into the Wild, yeah. And 9 years, I guess. And it was written by Aaron Dignam, who wrote Submergence, and is an actor who appeared in The Crossing Guard, of all things.
Right.
So, yeah. But I haven't seen it. I know that the reception was fairly harsh.
Well, I'm just realizing now why he wouldn't be making a lot of movies as a director, because the kinds of movies he's made don't get made anymore.
Well, yeah, sure. The mid-range,
The mid-range,
$20 to $40 million,
character-driven movies. I mean, there's so many great movies in that milieu, but it's rare to come across them now because of the way Hollywood has evolved, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, I mean, it was something I was hearing every year at TIFF. People would say, they'd be here with a movie just like that and say how rare it was. This was the only chance they had to make a movie like this in 2 years.
Yeah.
Because that was once the indie revolution was over about 2004, 2005, and DVD killed the theatrical market because the windows were so tight that movies just didn't have any legs. Mm-hmm. And then that shifted to blockbusters because those were the films that could make all the money back in the first weekend or in the first 3 days, 3-4 weeks. These opportunities just went away. They're still making them, but now they're made with European money or 824.
Yeah.
We'll just greenlight 3 movies almost randomly.
Yeah.
Or like Boots Riley making Sorry to Bother You. You just have to find the most impossible way in to get the thing funded.
Yeah.
But they used to be a dime a dozen. They used to come out constantly. They played theatrically.
Yeah.
And in the case of The Pledge, Warner Brothers distributed it. I think that's Paramount Vantage released Into the Wild. So Warner distributing The Pledge I think is the only time a major studio has made a Sean Penn directed film.
Yeah.
But there's so much more in them. There's so much going on, and the older I get, the more they appeal to me, just because they tend to be focused on human interaction and basic emotional stakes rather than big crises and things falling out of the sky.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
now it's something. I'm trying to think of the modern equivalent, and maybe Sicario sort of counts because it's still a character study wrapped up in a big
fantastic
machinery.
Movie. Yeah.
The first one I haven't seen the sequel.
I haven't seen the second one either. But the first one I saw twice.
Yeah.
And terrific performances and excellent filmmaking.
But you could
there's a filmmaker who
Denis Villeneuve,
who would have been making all kinds of the movies we're talking about back then, and who still may.
He is now, but he's wrapping them up in like genre packaging.
Yeah,
because Arrival's a character piece.
Yeah,
Blade Runner is too.
Sure,
he's found a way to do it.
Yeah,
but to do it, he has to pretend he's making big genre epics.
Yeah, and Jean-Marc Vallée is making those kinds of movies.
He's doing them as 8-hour TV shows.
That's right. That's very good. Very good television.
Yeah.
By the way.
And maybe that's it. Once peak TV started, that's where it all went.
There is a lot of good things on TV now that, but the great actors, you can see them in an 8-10 part series.
Gravitating to it. I just finished Homecoming, and it's basically a 5-hour miniseries with Julia Roberts and Stephen James and Bobby Cannavale, and it's great. It's based on a podcast.
Wow.
This is what they're doing now. Like, this is where the dramatic opportunity, and it's directed by Sam Esmail, who made Mr. Robot.
Yeah.
And so it feels cinematic and big and complex, but it's got this emotional undercurrent about a relationship through it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's something about compressing an entire narrative into 2 hours that I find deeply satisfying. It's it's movies. It's how I was raised.
Yeah.
But you could see, I could see The Pledge now as a sort of Broadchurch-like series where every episode would focus on a different interview.
Absolutely.
Like the classic noir structure. He's meeting and interviewing people over and over and over again.
Yeah. That movie, The Pledge, could be stretched out.
But I don't want it to be. That's the beauty of a film like this, is that you get these quick hits of performance and these. It's basically like watching a series of scene partnerships, right? Like it's Nicholson with this person, Nicholson with that person. Mm-hmm. He's how many times is he in a room with more than 2 people?
Yeah,
almost never happens.
Well, and the template for decades and decades was you are going to build a quilt, which is the movie, which is this long, and which contains all these textures and qualities and. We've had amazing results from that. Now there's another template that seems to be out there, and I'm all for it. But if maybe that's the natural reaction to tentpole movies, where it's all about the movie in post and CGI and, you know, big action sequences. So where are the actors who are not interested in that or are past that going to gravitate to? Well, you're going to see them in some pretty great roles in cable series, right?
Yeah. I mean, in the olden days, you would make a franchise picture so you could get 2 or 3 indies made, because then you'd suddenly get the international name recognition to finance them. But that doesn't happen anymore, apparently.
No.
So you get somebody like John C. Reilly, who's off doing Disney, Disney voice work and Will Ferrell comedies, but also producing his own dramatic vehicles like the Sisters Brothers. So he could work with Jacques Audiard and all the actors.
I saw that a couple nights ago.
It's great.
It really is.
Yeah, and he's terrific.
He's terrific. He's perfect. He's perfect. They're both great.
Yeah.
It's a very, very solid movie. I mean, I love the book.
Yeah, it's very different from the book, isn't it?
It's very different from
funnier.
the book. The book's a lot funnier. You're actually laughing and chuckling to yourself constantly reading that book. The movie's a different animal, but I still think really, really worthy.
Yeah, and in a weird way. I mean, it's got an interrogation of masculinity and what it means to live,
absolutely,
as a man of violence.
Yeah,
in much the same way. Well, The Pledge isn't. I mean, I don't think that. Nicholson has to reckon with his life the way. I mean, he's forced to in the very end, but he's not constantly thinking about it. It doesn't weigh on him the way it does with the characters in the Sisters Brothers. But
no.
Yeah, watching a man do everything that is ostensibly correct and proper in his work, and yet wind up betraying both himself and the trust of the people he's supposed to love the most. It's just this. It's this perfect tragic arc. It's all noir fiction. I don't think of the film in noir terms, but the narrative structure is it's a detective story.
Yeah,
and it's a detective story with an ironic, crushing ending because it's ambiguous, but I'm pretty sure we are supposed to know that he was right and it didn't matter, and that's like the thing that haunts me about the best detective fiction is knowing that. And it's not even a quote from a detective novel, but it's Casablanca, right? Like all this amounts to a hill of beans. It's only important to the people involved in it.
Yeah,
and he didn't prevent anything. It just happened without him.
Yeah,
which is so powerful and so tragic, and I think the reason the movie, because if you don't stick the landing in these things, they dissipate. They just don't linger. And I just think about that haunted, hollow emptiness at the very end of The Pledge, and think this is the only way this story could end.
Yeah,
you can't have a victory.
Yeah, and the ending is extraordinary, because you see the montage of the ending. You actually see it earlier in the movie, but we don't have all the information. You don't have the information, and it's a curious thing when it appears earlier as the montage, but it is it's like a fable. It's like a beautiful fable by the end of the movie. And I should also mention it's based on a short story by a Swiss writer, Frederick Dürrenmatt. I don't know.
Yeah, I was not familiar with any of it. Yeah. It feels very. I mean, maybe that's it. It feels very European in its approach, and the sort of the elliptical nature of morality.
Yeah,
and the way people's lives drift in and out. We're not used to seeing that in a lot of American filmmaking.
No, but somehow with that, that impulse from that European sensibility, it's got a very American. He's stuck it in, a Nevada police station, and those guys, they all feel real American. There's a 4th of July parade in it. There's a flea market. There's there's a local bar, there's the gas station, there's all these hyper identifiable marks of American culture in it, and yet it's the reason I like the movie is he elevates it all, and he mixes it up, and he surprises. Yeah, the storytelling.
There's no condescension to the American iconography that he's using.
Nope.
I think he really does believe in it as it appears. It's, the sort of clean scrubbed American town where awful things are lurking underneath, but the town itself is about innocence and simply not knowing what's going on.
Yeah.
Because, as we see, the police are working to keep it that way.
Yeah.
Because they're just solving crimes that aren't really solved and denying reality.
Yeah.
So everybody else can feel safe.
Yeah, and it's funny, I as I was trying to think of a movie, there are a few different movies, sort of left field movies I thought about. One of them was Tomorrow, this Robert Duvall movie from 1972, I believe the same year that he did The Godfather or before. It's a black and white movie that actually played at TIFF in the 80s, early 80s, when they were still using the Bloor cinema. And he plays a simple hillbilly, basically, who I think ends up in a murder trial in this small southern community. But it's also a love story, and it's simply told, and his performance is so extraordinary. And it's a rural movie. The screenplay was written by Horton Foote.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'm a sucker for that long line of wonderful American actors and actresses who we associate from 70s and 80s, 90s movies. Robert Duvall, Sissy Spacek, Tommy Lee Jones, Pacino, De Niro.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Raging Bull as a movie.
Sure.
But I like movies that have fabulous, honest performances that actors really inhabit. And I mean, Sean Penn's one of those actors for me, and it doesn't surprise me that in his movies, the performers he draws and the performances he gets out of his actors are just that.
Yeah. He is a really generous director. He just seems to savor performance.
Yeah.
And let people own the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of character-driven movies.
Sure.
The Drawer Boy.
You can get to it, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is, I mean, yeah.
It's a great story.
It's relevant, too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, this is a movie that was adapted from Michael Healy's oft-produced play, The Drawer Boy, which was written, I think, in the late 90s, and I think was one of the most produced plays in the United States and Canada for a number of years. It's been performed all over the world, and Aviva Armour-Ostroff and her partner Arturo Perez-Torres adapted and co-directed this movie a couple years ago, and it's just finishing up its festival run now.
Well, we had it at the Canadian Film Festival in Toronto.
Canadian Film Festival, and won the Best Feature there. And so it opens at the Carlton here in Toronto on November 23rd.
It'll be Friday after this episode is released.
Okay,
this is coming out on the Tuesday, just before it.
Yeah, and it's basically a three-character movie. A great, myself, Stuart Hughes, and Jacob Eamon are the three principals in it, and it's a great story, just from a writing and plot point of view. but it also gives us as actors a great opportunity to explore so many different ranges in what's there in the writing, and it's there's simplicity and an accessibility to it that I know my family, both my parents are from farms, and I know that all my relatives, whether they're farmers or tradespeople or whatever, they can sit down and they can watch this movie and they can appreciate it because they'll see story, they'll see performances, they'll see heart and soul, and they'll also see artfulness in it and male vulnerability as well. Because in the movie, my character, Morgan, is basically the main caregiver of his childhood friend, Angus, who suffered a war injury in World War II. The movie's set in around 1970. And so there's a great sort of assumed compassion between the two because they're farmers. They're not showing too much. There's great care between the two of them. Each is the primary relationship in each other's life. And then Jacob Eamon's character shows up and throws a wrench into the works. But as a movie, you never know how they're going to end up. You just do your work on the days. Sure. And this was a movie that was a labor of love for everyone and low budget, and we were on location the whole time in southwest Ontario, farm country. But I was so impressed with it as a movie and the work of everyone involved. It's a movie that if I opened up a car dealership tomorrow and that was my last movie, I'd go, yeah, I did that, and I'm proud of it.
All right. Is there anything from The Pledge that found its way in? Did you use any? Because this is always sort of the way we try to get out of the episode. Is there something that resonated? The film is, both films are kind of about isolation. Yeah. In a way, but I don't really know that the tones are the same.
Nothing that I would...
Isolation and dedication, I suppose.
Pardon me?
Isolation and dedication, I suppose we talked about that.
Isolation and dedication. Thinking of my character, Morgan, and Jack Nicholson's character, there's a dedication and an obsession to trying to keep a lid on a relationship that I have with Angus, Stuart Hughes' character, that is in danger of falling apart because of the appearance of the other character in our story. I don't know. I can't. I'm just bullshitting right now. Yeah, no, I can't think of any connection other than I knew that in playing this farmer who had a deep secret, that I didn't have to be likable. Mm-hmm. That there had to be an edge to him and a fearsome quality to him to guard his secret from anyone who might want to move in on the relationship I have with Angus, and at the same time those sort of masculine reptilian qualities had to be there in sync with an extreme sensitivity and vulnerability to my charge.
Mm-hmm.
Stuart Hughes' character.
Yeah. I always wonder, I mean, I'm convinced that the selection of the movie, and the whole point of this podcast is that the selection of the movie, the choice, says something about the guest.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there's a way to knit it back into the most current work, or the work being talked about, I'm always fascinated by the opportunity. Yeah. But yeah, they're very different men, ultimately, right? I mean, it's not a similarity, but the idea that this context repeats itself over and over again in drama is fascinating to me, just because of course it does. It's the thing that, everybody on some level is obsessed with, who you really are, what you really do, and what masks we all wear and all that. It's the nature of drama.
It is the nature of drama, and there's I don't know. I got nothing more to say about the connection between the Drawer Boy and the Pledge, other than
we're all just
they're really actors' movies in some ways, and that's the deepest connection I have with it. Yeah.
Well, it's certainly a valid one. Well, I didn't get to ask, what was your first encounter with it? When did you see The Pledge? Was it theatrically released?
I think I saw it after it was theatrically released, because I saw The Crossing Guard and I thought, wow, this is really good. And then I saw The Pledge, I think, on DVD after I didn't see it on the big screen. And then I went back to The Indian Runner, his first feature.
Oh, wow. So you did the cycle.
Yeah. But my wife remembers seeing it with me and going, oh yeah, it's a really good movie, as I recall. And so, I trust her taste. We have very similar tastes. And if she said, no, not really that good, but she said, no, that was really good. So I knew I was in the right direction.
She's got your back.
Yeah.
My thanks to Richard Clarkin, who you can see on screen in The Drawer Boy at Toronto's Carlton Cinema this Friday, November 23rd, and it opens in Calgary November 30th at the Globe Cinema. Thanks also to Winnie Wong. She knows what she did. You can find Richard on Twitter at RichardClarkin1, all one word, and you can find The Pledge on DVD from Warner Home Entertainment. It's currently out of print, but it's not too hard to find used, either on its own or in a couple of Warner's multi-film sets. And you should definitely do that. It's a really good movie. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you feel like leaving a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or wherever you enjoy the show, that would be greatly appreciated. Every little bit helps, it truly does. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.
I'm afraid you're just too darn loud.